Hello guys! So this video is about Paper 1. Paper 1 is about reading and use of English. So what does it involve? It involves your reading abilities and your usage of grammar and vocabulary. Let's take a look at the different parts of this paper. Part 1. Part 1 is always a multiple choice. So you always have A, B, C, D to be chosen, okay? It always involves collocations or prepositions or verbs, nouns that need to be completed in a text, okay? You always have 8 questions in it. Now let's talk about part 2. What is part 2 about? It's always a text with some gaps, 8 gaps, okay? And you have no options. It's called open-close. So you have to write one word, no more than one word for each gap, and you have no options A, B, C, D. You have to bring up your own vocabulary and grammar so that you can complete this task. Now let's talk about part 3. In part 3, you always have a word formation activity. What is it about? You have a text with 8 gaps for you to be filled. You always have by the right side of the page the stem word. So you have to take this word and change it. So you're going to change nouns into verbs, verbs into adjectives, or adverbs into adjectives. So you always have to change the word. That's why it's called word formation. Now let's talk about part 4. It's called keyword transformation. You have one sentence and you have to rewrite it so that it has a different sentence but with the same idea. You also have a keyword that is supposed to appear in your answer. You are supposed to complete the sentence with from 2 to 5 words. At part 5, you have a text and you have some questions, 6 questions about it. Each question is a multiple choice one. For each question, you have 4 options. You are supposed to choose A, B, C, or D for each question. At part 6, you have a text with 6 missing parts. So you are supposed to read from a list of parts and decide which part goes in which place. So you are supposed to complete the text with some paragraphs that you have there. It's a reading activity. At part 7, you have 4 short texts and a list of 10 items. You are supposed to match the 10 items with the 4 texts. So, for paper 1, you are supposed to use your reading abilities and your usage of structures like vocabulary and grammar. And here's a tip. For parts 4, 5, and 6, you get 2 marks for each correct answer, so focus on them. Another tip is spelling mistakes are not acceptable in paper 1, so make sure that your spelling is great. Now let's see some tips about paper 1. In part 1, remember that you should read the whole text before choosing between options A, B, C, or D. The options may have a similar meaning, so it's your job to choose the best one for each gap. In part 1, you may have to use collocations such as to pay attention to, or phrasal verbs such as keep on and get on well with. About part 2, remember to read the whole text before completing the text. Don't choose your answer in part 1 before you have read all the options. And with the exception of can't, don't use abbreviations such as don't, won't, as they count as 2 words. In part 3, don't leave the base form in part 3 unchanged. Always remember to change the word. Remember that the words you need to write might have to change into a negative or a plural. Read the whole text before starting to change the words. About part 4, make sure that you have used the word that is given. Try to keep the original meaning. Don't write out the full sentence in your answer sheet. And for parts 3 and 4, don't give alternative answers for any questions. Part 5 is about reading. So, what we usually have is that each question is related to one paragraph. The last question may be about the main idea of the whole text. Remember to read the questions carefully and check each option against the text before rejecting it. In Part 6, remember to read carefully the sentences before and after each gap. Check that the completed paragraph makes sense in this passage as a whole. The missing sentence must fit the overall context. Finally, in Part 7, don't assume that if the same word appears in the text as well as in the option, this means you have located the answer. Remember to read carefully. About Parts 4, 5, and 6, remember to keep the development of the texts in mind. Read each question carefully before you answer the questions to get an overall impression and understanding of it. Read the titles and subtitles of the texts that were given. They are there to help you. Don't decide on your answer before reading the whole of a sentence in all parts. About Paper 1, be careful. Don't spend too much time in one specific part. Don't write the answers to any of the examples on your answer sheets. I hope these classes help you excel at FCE.